Good evening, everyone.
Hi.
Welcome to our second event, Israel at War, our second seminar in this series. Tonight, I want to ask those of you that join us, would you please put yourselves on mute when you join so that we can make sure that we have fewer interruptions. I would also like to say a warm welcome to all of you who are viewing from around the world. Thank you for joining us. If you cannot join us tonight and you want to tell your friends, we will be posting everything again on our YouTube channels and on our websites. So to introduce myself again, my name is Dr. Carl Yonker. I'm a researcher at the Center for the Study of Contemporary European Jewry and also at the Cotler Institute for Freedom, Democracy, and Human Rights. Tonight, I want to welcome our two speakers, Professor Uriya Shavit, the head of the Cotler Institute and the head of the Center for the Contemporary Study of European Jewry. And I also want to welcome General Danny Yatom, the former head of the Mossad, who will be our second speaker tonight. And then I will speak at the end. So without further delay, I would like to introduce Professor Shavit, who will be giving a lecture on the war, social and political implications. Professor Shavit.
Thank you, Carl. Let me start by saying this. We call this seminar tonight, or this afternoon, we called it, I think the subtitle that you don't see here is Fighting 21st Century Nazism. And we don't use the word Nazism lightly to avoid its trivialization, obviously. So let me tell you why we're using it tonight and why many people, including from a spectrum of political opinions, why they feel it is right to use it. It's because a combination of three factors. The combination is what makes Hamas Nazi. One is the fact that Hamas is informed by anti-Semitic notions. Okay, and I encourage you to read the Hamas Charter. It is an anti-Semitic document. Now, unlike Nazi ideology, anti-Semitism is not the foundation of the ideology of Hamas, but it is an inherent part of that ideology, and that makes a difference. Second, it is the viciousness of the attacks that Hamas launched, the cruelty, which in and of itself is not exceptional or not unique just to Nazis. But, and this is the third factor, it was organized and was executed last Saturday in a way intent on wiping out entire Jewish communities. There are kibbutzim that lost around a quarter of their members. This is the act of Nazis. So with all the caution that is needed, I think it is appropriate to say that Hamas is a Nazi organization and needs to be treated as such. This brings me to the next point. If Hamas is Nazi, then obviously what Israel needs to do at the moment is to denazify the Gaza Strip. And there isn't a way of half doing it. You either do it entirely or it will not be done. It will not get done. It will not be possible to resume normal life in the Israeli South without the total and absolute and unmitigated dismantling of Hamas. And if it will not be possible to resume normal life in the Israeli South, then Tel Aviv, Jerusalem, and Haifa as well will not stand. So bringing down the Hamas regime is an existential objective now for Israel. There are different ways of doing it. And I think it is quite crucial at the moment that the Israeli government puts forward not just clearly and unequivocally the objective of the war, that is, to bring down Hamas, the entire regime, social, military, everything, but an idea about the day after, an idea that also has an element of hope, even if the hope is not realistic, that it has something which is beyond war and beyond destruction. This has so far not been done. I hope it will be done soon, and I'm sure General Yatom, will have a few things to say about that. Now, you know the balance of power, or more correctly, you know the imbalance of power. And therefore, it's obvious that this war will be decided with world public opinion. It is really Western governments and the levels of credit that they would give Israel in advancing its war objectives that will decide the fate of the war. Which means that, as I said last week, each and every person who cares about Israel has potentially a vital role in this war. Most importantly, to give a call or send an email to your congresswoman, your congressman, your representative, and make them understand where you stand in this conflict and where you expect them to stand. I think the backlash, the response to what happened at Harvard University last week was too moderate. It was the equivalent of American university students praising Al-Qaeda the day after 9/11, praising Japan the day after Pearl Harbor. And, you know, university students, they have the right, I think, to be stupid or ignorant. That's why they're students. They're there to learn. But university professors, let alone university presidents, they don't have that privilege. And I think what's most disturbing in this entire affair that maybe you've heard about or maybe you want to learn more about later, what's most disturbing is the response by the Harvard administration and Harvard's president, which was so much about not angering anyone, being okay with everyone. But sometimes your duty, your obligation as a professor is to stand up for something, to make a point, to correct the mistakes of your students. And that American academia, that it deteriorated to that point that reading the statement issued by more than 30 students' organizations at Harvard was not found by its leadership as sickening, as something that has to be treated swiftly and unequivocally. That is very disturbing. It shows just how much work there is to be done in the coming weeks by all those who care, not just about Israel, but about basic concepts of justice and morality. Few words about Israeli society today. It is very encouraging to see the mobilization, the participation, and that 95% of the electorate stands firm about what needs to be done now. That is super encouraging in these very sad, agonizing, and stressful days. But there is also the question of implications. And the implications will obviously be far-reaching. I'm not going to ignore or escape from or circumvent the explicit political issues. But I want to say something different before that. there is now this blame game already going on. I think it's tragic because the sad truth is there is enough blame for everyone. There is really no need for people to start accusing one another at the moment. There is a famous story. I don't know if it's true, but it's a good story. One day, the chief of Israeli intelligence, the head of the Mossad, and the head of the internal service, the Shabbat, sat at the government meeting and began to fight over authorities. Who's going to be responsible for what? And then one of the deputies, according to the legend, knocked on the table and said, calm down, calm down. There are enough terrorists for all of us. So the same can be said about this blame game that's now going on. There is enough blame for everyone. But I think the most useful thing each and every one of us can do now is to look inside himself or herself, to self-reflect and see what we as individuals and organizations, what we did wrong. So before saying a word about politicians and generals, let me say that Israeli media, Israeli think tanks, Israeli professors of Middle Eastern studies, we will also need to reflect why we got some things, certain things, why we got them so wrong. Military correspondents, for example, they will need to ask themselves, have they been enough outside studios? How many times have they been there in the south? Have they relied too often on sources from within the military? Have they engaged actually in parroting rather than in critically reporting? And we need to ask something about Israeli Orientalism, Israeli think tanks, and the echo chamber that they sometimes create, whereby a person graduates from the Israeli intelligence, studies or advances his or her studies of Arabic, becomes a teacher in the field, and then teaches the next generation of intelligence officers and soldiers. And then that the counter response to that are professors who are very critical of this phenomenon of the Israeli Orientalist echo chamber, but then their way of correcting it is becoming so dogmatic, so devil's advocates on everything, so politically oriented in the fake progressiveness that no one listens to them, or very few people listen to them. How do we get back to the point where the scientific study of this region becomes more of field studies from within and less politically oriented and more objective, more scientific? These are all questions we will need to ask. But obviously, the primary blame on this will be laid with politicians and generals. And there isn't really a way to escape the following. The person who is at the top of any organization is always responsible for the achievements and the failures of that organization. Being responsible doesn't mean being guilty, doesn't necessarily mean sharing the blame, but it means that if you had a company, a sports team, or a government, then the responsibility lies with you. There's no way to escape that. I think it's very interesting to reflect on Netanyahu's conservative path and how it changed during the past 10 months and where this puts us today. One great advantage that conservative views have, if they are true to their essence, is that changes are being advanced very gradually and very moderate. And I think some of the greatest achievements of Netanyahu, and he had many, were because he had a conservative impulse. People say, oh, we didn't do anything. Well, sometimes to do less is the right choice, especially when a society is as fragile as Israeli society and surrounded by such vicious enemies. The last 10 months were uncharacteristic of Netanyahu. He advanced two revolutions, one, the judicial, and the other, creating a new Middle East through the negotiations with Saudi Arabia, which was more of a Shimon Peres kind of way of thinking. The disastrous result is not necessarily his doing. This will be examined. But I think it teaches us, as Israelis and Jews around the world, a very important lesson. Israel is a very shaky boat in an ocean of hostility, and those sitting on it make for a very fragile social framework. This country cannot afford governments that are not national unity governments. At least it will not be able to afford such governments for years to come. This society cannot afford doing things not based, doing radical things that are not based on broad consensus, simply because of its fragility. That is the truth about Israel. Now, I have to be honest. I don't know if at some point the Prime Minister will stand facing the Israeli public and say, I take responsibility, everything else will be examined later. But I'm sure many of you watched the movie Golda. If you did, you can indicate that, which I think in the United States and in Israel featured just recently. The movie is just 100 minutes. I think that's one of the good things about it. It's relatively short. And when it's just 100 minutes, a lot of history is condensed as if it happened all at once. The fact of the matter is the following. Immediately in the aftermath of the Yom Kippur War, Israel held elections. Golda Meir's Labour Party won 39.6% of the votes. It took a lot of public demonstrations and outcry for her to resign. It took 3 more years for Labour to lose power. So if everyone is expecting a swift process or one based on consensus in terms of political transformations, this is unlikely to happen. I don't know if the Prime Minister will do the honorable thing. That's up to him. A final point. Israel is united now, and I think the Jewish world is united alongside Israel. That is good. But there is a truth we need to recognize. And after the war ends, it will have to be addressed and amended. Israel is today one of the few democracies that still has compulsory military service, like Norway, like Finland, like Austria. But Israel is not the same as Finland, Norway, or Austria. It is a country, as we have just witnessed, that faces existential threats. It needs compulsory service, and it needs the compulsory service to be real. Now, I'm not sure everyone knows the data. Today, approximately 1/3 of Jewish males are not recruited at all. And if you examine those who are recruited and are discharged relatively fast, the percentage, the rate is much higher. Israel simply cannot afford that. That will have to change. It needs that the IDF will have the authority to recruit each and every 18-year-old Jewish man who is fit for service. And with this, Carl, I think I'll conclude. And the floor, I think, is now yours.
Thank you very much, Professor Shavit. Now I would like to welcome General Retired Danny Yatom, who will speak on the war so far, a strategic perspective. So Danny, the floor is yours, please.
Thank you very much, Carl. Do you hear me?
Yes, we hear you.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Professor Shavit. Thank you, Carl. Good evening, everybody. Israeli faces nowadays a very difficult time. It started 9 days ago when something that none of us really thought could happen, happened. And this is the invasion of thousands of terrorist Hamas organization, belong to the Hamas, that invaded Israel. They did it in a way that all the early warning and defensive systems collapsed, each and every of them. The intelligence, for instance, the intelligence that researches what's going on inter alia also in Hamas, presented its evaluation and research many times to the Prime Minister and to the ministers in the government. And the bottom line was that Hamas is a murderous organization, but Hamas did not intend to carry out any operation against Israel, because this was what we got from the researchers of the intelligence, because Hamas felt as if he controlled what's going on in the Gaza Strip, and he liked the situation. Money came from Qatar, and then instead of money, oil came from Qatar. About 18,000 Palestinians every morning got and enter Israel in order to work, and every evening came back. And this is a big part of the GDP of the Palestinian people. The income due to what they are doing, the income due to their doing in Israel. And Hamas gave us the feeling that Hamas does not want or did not want to deteriorate the situation. For us, it was very attractive to accept such a bottom line, because for the last 14 years, since Netanyahu took office as prime minister until today, he led the concept about which the Palestinian Authority is not a factor in the equation. He did not want to negotiate with the Palestinian Authority at all. He always rejected it. In the back of his mind, he thought about Israel from the sea to the river, annexing Judea and Samaria. When he was asked, and what will be the fate of the Palestinians living in Judea and Samaria, some 2.5 million Palestinians, there was always an answer like, when we will meet the bridge, we will get over it. And he just led the Israelis to believe in the other way around concept, which was, let's keep the Hamas in a situation that Hamas would not have any demands from Israel. And as far as Hamas is silent, we are silent. Once Hamas erupted the area by what we used to call a military circle, then Israel retaliated. In all the cases when the ceasefire was achieved, Israel was with its end up, meaning we had the upper end, and what Israel tried to achieve is to keep a silent time, as long as possible, the interval between two adjacent circles of eruption should be as long as possible in order to allow those who are living in the envelope of Gaza to live their lives. Well, unfortunately, the Hamas never ever thought the way we, the Israelis, thought that this is his way of thinking. Hamas, as Professor Shavit said, Hamas is a Nazi organization, and we knew it. Look at its covenant. It is written there that each and every Muslim should kill the Jews and destroy the Jewish state. There is no way, and now we understand it much better, there is no way to negotiate with Hamas. There are only two ways: to leave Hamas as it is, and to understand that in 1, 2, 3 years, he will gain again his power and will attack Israel in a very cruel way. And the second possibility is to destroy it. And Israel, as a matter of fact, does not have any other choice or any other way but to destroy Hamas. And this is mainly because we are surrounded by enemies. And one element of the projection of our power is the deterrence capability of Israel. people do not want to quarrel with us because they was thinking that we are that strong that whenever they will touch us, they will lose. And this is according to history, even when we were caught under a total surprise 50 years ago in the Yom Kippur War. And I've been there as a young major fighting against the Egyptian armed forces. And somehow the elements of the surprise there are very similar to the elements of the surprise here. We never got an early warning. The soldiers and the officers that fought bravely, supreme bravely, those that were caught under total surprise and went out in order to fight for their lives. Men and women, youngsters, they did it for the sake of saving their lives and for the sake of saving the lives of their families. Unfortunately, many got killed in the exchange of fire between themselves and the Hamas terrorists. But when we took positions 50 years ago in the Sinai, what we saw after being hit by anti-tank missiles, that we were not aware of those missiles fielded already in the Egyptian armed forces, and we lost about half of our force during the first 72 hours, half of our force. We stood there and we fought and we stopped the Third Army, which is, army is like a corps, the Third Army. And then we led the entire Israeli armed forces to 101 kilometer, which is almost 100 kilometers from Cairo. And in the Golan Heights, our troops reached the distance of the range of 40 kilometers from the outskirts of Damascus. The main difference between our situation there and our situation today is that today our people had to fight in their own settlements. And there were many, many civilians, including infants and little children, that were in the area of war. This was not our case in the Sinai. Therefore, we had much more degrees of freedom to operate, to send tanks, to here. The members of the kibbutzim, the members of the settlements, and then later on, after too long time, when the main Israeli defense forces arrived, they had to fight very cautiously in order not to harm and to hurt any of our own citizens. But in addition to it, because the idea, the goal of the terrorists was to conquer those settlements, to hold them for some 24 hours, to go from door to door to door to door, and to kill everybody the way they did it. Our forces did not have enough freedom of possibilities, because first and foremost, we wanted to take care of those who were in the bunkers in their houses or elsewhere. So I would say that the conditions that this generation fought under in the Gaza, in the envelope of the Gaza Strip, the conditions were much more difficult than the conditions that we faced, although we were caught under a total surprise as this generation as well. And you know, when there are failures, there are many, many brave people. And those stories will continue to come out. And after we will win the war, and I will say something about next phases, after we will win the war, there will be two main committees. One is the inquiry committee, which will have to find out what went wrong and who are to blame. And I fully agree that we should not play now the blame game. This is not the time. Even though the Chief of Staff of the Armed Forces already said that he is responsible. But the Prime Minister never ever said it. And his ministers never ever said it. You know, I'm not a judge. I don't want to judge or prejudge, but there is no way to think that Prime Minister that rules for the last 14 years does not take responsibility for such an horrific situation. And the other type of committee will be the committee which will find those heroes that should get medals, as the committee after the Yom Kippur War, and those two committees, each of which will deal with its own issues to inquire and to find out. We have to understand that since 1948, this is the first time that a Jewish settlement was conquered. It didn't happen for the last 75 years, but a week ago. We have to understand that in addition to the surprise, there were also some other elements, like for instance, due to the concept that Hamas is not going to deteriorate the situation, the Israeli forces deployed along the border with Gaza were too small and too weak. And there are many other things that we will have to inquire. At the same time, we are looking at the Northern Front. And the Northern Front starts to deteriorate, to warm up. Hizballah lies on the border. Hizballah is bigger and stronger than Hamas, with not 15,000 rockets as Hamas has, but about 10 times more, 150,000 missiles that cover the entire area of Israel. But I'm sure fighting for the last 3 major wars in Israel, including the Yom Kippur War, I have no doubt that at the end we will win. If there will be 2 fronts, Hizballah and Hamas, it will be much more difficult. But it looks, and I don't want to say anything because maybe I will be wrong, but I look on the American behavior, which I can only salute to President Biden, who is really worried about what's going on, and sent to the area a big carrier, Gerald R. Ford, with some 75 airplanes, with some other ships equipped with the Tomahawk cruise missiles, and so on and so forth. And I think that this force deters the Hizballah and deters the Iranians. But still, now we have to be ready. And we mobilized more than 350,000 soldiers. Now we are fully mobilized, fully equipped with munition and whatever we need. The defensive line in the north is strong, and we are now in the almost end of the preparations to do something in the Sinai, in the Gaza Strip. The definition of the government to the Chief of Staff of the Armed Forces about the mission is to destroy the military capability and the regimental capabilities of the Hamas. And I'll tell you, what do I see in my imagination? Remember Daesh. There were years that Daesh, the ISIS, controlled 1/3 of Syria and 1/3 of Iraq. Also, the United States of America, with its allies, decided to fight ISIS. And they succeeded. And today, ISIS is not anymore an organization with a state, the way Hamas is an organization with a state. Today, Daesh or ISIS is like a regular, so to speak, terror organization that still conducts terror attacks, but in small dimensions by small squads, not the thousands of terrorists that he used to have, but a squad of 3 or a squad of 2 terrorists that commit terror attacks. This is the way we would like Hamas to be, because I'm not naive to think that we will be able to chase and to kill each and every of the Hamas terrorists up to the last one. But we must find their headquarters, we must chase their leaders, and we must kill them. Otherwise, we will not regain our deterrence capability. And without strong deterrence capability, we might find ourselves early and time and again in a situation where we are attacked because we lost our deterrence capability and our enemies think that we are weak. This is the main reason, and the other reason is to punish those that behave the way they behaved, slaughtered, decapitated infants, women, men, and some others. So, in order to sum up my presentation, even if we will have to fight in two fronts, we will do it. More than two fronts starts to be too difficult, meaning the front of Judea Samaria, for instance. We have to control the area of Judea and Samaria and to avoid any eruption of fighting between the terrorists residing in Judea and Samaria and our forces. And at the same time, we have to take into consideration our relations with Egypt and Jordan, because we don't want to lose those relations. And due to the way we are acting in the Gaza Strip, pushing Gazian people to the southern part of the Gaza Strip, the Egyptians are starting to send signals that Israel acts against the interests of Egypt, because the Egyptians are highly afraid that those 2 millions or part of those 2 millions will enter into the Sinai, into Egyptian sovereign territory. And in Jordan, there are big demonstrations because the majority of the Jordanian people are Palestinians with full rights in Jordan, etc. And they gathered a few last days and demonstrated and shouted against Israel and against our intention to continue and to operate in the Gaza Strip. Till now, the security forces of Jordan control the situation, but we have to be also sensitive towards there, because we do not want our peace with Jordan to collapse. So now what we need to do is to end our preparations, to continue to look for the hostages, 150 approximately hostages, and believe, and I believe so, and believe that this is a very difficult time, but we will overcome it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Danny. Thank you very much. Now is my turn. And I will pick up a little bit about from where Danny ended, speaking about the ideology and strategic aspirations or objectives of Lebanese Hezbollah. I want to focus on three main points when I'm talking about Hezbollah today. One is Muqawama, the idea of Muqawama or resistance. The second is the axis of resistance, or the alliance that makes up this axis of resistance. And then the concept of the unity of fronts, a strategic concept that was pushed forward by the Iranians. But before I get into those three things, I want to contextualize Hizballah a little bit. And the best way I think to contextualize Hizballah is being a movement between Lebanon and Iran. And to understand Hizballah, you need to understand both of these kind of pressures or environments in which Hizballah operates. Iran helped establish Hizballah. It's one of its oldest proxies in the region. They have a very close symbiotic working relationship. At times, it's hard to tell the two apart. Hassan Nasrallah, the Secretary General of Hizballah, is obviously very close with the Ayatollahs in Tehran. Sometimes he takes orders directly from them. Sometimes he's given more leeway. Sometimes he takes his own independent decisions. But Hizballah also operates in its own environment, which is the Lebanese environment. And within Lebanon, while it is the dominant party, it is the only armed party, it still faces constraints. Since 2019, Lebanon has been beset by crisis, a severe economic crisis that's seen its currency be devalued from $1 was equal to 1,500 Lebanese pounds to today, it's $1 equals around 95,000 Lebanese pounds. The currency is completely bottomed out. There's political paralysis. Lebanon is without a president now. There's a caretaker cabinet and caretaker kind of premiership that's running the country or not running the country. And Hizballah is part of this internal political game of balance. Now, any conflict that were to break out on the northern front between Hizballah and Israel would not necessarily be welcomed by all Lebanese. Christians, Druze, Sunnis, other minorities in Lebanon are not necessarily the biggest fans of Hizballah, and given the situation in Lebanon today, view that military conflict with Israel, which will bring more destruction upon Lebanon, to be ill-advised. That doesn't make them pro-Israel by any stretch of the imagination, but it means that they have other interests and concerns. So this is the environment that Hizballah is operating in. Now, one of the main ideas and motivating ideologies behind Hizballah and also Hamas is the idea of muqawama, or resistance. Now, this doctrine is basically a doctrine of constant combat or persistent warfare. Okay, it's an ongoing kind of never-ending struggle, a violent struggle to resist whatever they view as oppressing them or view as opposing them. Within this doctrine, there's 4 or 5 key points. One is that peace is not an option. It's not that you resist for a period of time or you try to take some gains or make some gains and then, come to the negotiating table and finalize a peace deal. It's not an option. It's constant battle, it's constant combat, it's persistent warfare. Also important is that conflict or engaging in resistance doesn't wait for what we would consider strategic parity or a balance of forces. Hamas or Hizballah, Hamas especially as we just saw, and Hizballah now don't need to wait until they obtain the same types of weapons, the same type of manpower, have the same type of alliances as Israel does in order for it to start a conflict or to engage in conflict. It won't ever reach that equation, and it doesn't ever view that as part of the equation. It will just engage in conflict because conflict is the purpose, and it doesn't need this balance of forces. Because in the end, the objective of it is to weaken the enemy's resolve, Israel's resolve, where bloodshed is the point. Winning can be defined, and you see this with any conflict that Israel is engaged with Hamas or with Hizballah, that it appears, and by any mechanism or of measurement, that Israel emerges victorious or has achieved its objectives against these organizations, yet they come out and declare themselves the winners or declare victory in their own way. The last point that I'll make with understanding Muqawama is this idea of jihad as a popular war for liberation. So you hear now a lot of the talk, or the name of the Hamas operation is Al-Aqsa Flood, or to liberate Al-Aqsa, to liberate Jerusalem, to liberate Palestine. It's a liberation struggle. But they've turned jihad, or a religious concept of religious war, and also added to it this idea of liberation and a popular war of liberation. Now, those engaging in this, and what's been established with the Iranians have actively engaged in establishing this, is known as the axis of resistance. And to put it simply, the axis of resistance is simply all of those proxies and forces, militias, armed groups that are basically directly under Iranian influence and that span the region. This spans the region from Yemen to Iraq to Syria to Lebanon to the Palestinian territories. In Yemen, you have a movement known as the Houthis. In Iraq, you had groups like Katab Hizballah, Asab Ahl al-Haq, and the Badr organization. Some of these organizations fought in Syria as well. In Syria, you have the Fatimiyun brigades, the Zainabiyun brigades, which takes Afghani and Pakistani Shia and flew them into Syria to fight in Syria. You have Lebanese Hezbollah, the group that we're talking about, which was active in all of these arenas in different ways. And then you have the Palestinian territories, where you have Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad, which are also active and present in Syria and in Lebanon. This forms the axis of resistance, or the group, the alliance that basically looks to Iran for financial support, oftentimes ideological direction, and anything else, weapons, training, etc. Now, what Iran has promoted through this axis of resistance is a concept that is known as the unity of fronts. And this idea of a unity of fronts is this idea of building a deterrence policy that creates a defensive buffer, or a buffer in the Eastern Mediterranean, involving a number of its regional allies, to basically surround Israel. This is a classic kind of lead from behind approach for the Iranians. They love engaging in kind of in warfare by putting their proxies up front in the battlefield. And so the fronts, which Danny alluded to briefly, are Gaza, the West Bank, the Golan Heights or Syria, and South Lebanon. And these four fronts together conceptually, in the Iranian mind and in the mind of Hezbollah, and what you see with Hamas calling for others to join in, is to bring everyone into this battle, into this conflict. Whether you're in the West Bank, whether you're in the Golan Heights on the Syrian side of the border, or if you're in southern Lebanon. And here's a map that you can see just the idea of there are Hezbollah positions on the Syrian side of the Golan Heights and Shia militias there. Then you have South Lebanon, where Hezbollah dominates in southern Lebanon. Now, the objective of the unity of fronts and within this axis of resistance was to improve operational coordination between the different non-state militant groups within this loosely bound coalition. You saw in the lead up before Hamas's surprise attack, there were quite a few meetings in Beirut between leaders of Palestinian Islamic Jihad, Hamas, and Hezbollah. You see these meetings frequently also happen in Damascus and elsewhere, but there's a constant communication and coordination. Now, there's some debate of what role Iran actually played in the attack. Did they help in planning and coordinating? Did they say give the okay and go ahead? All that will be found out in time. But the main idea, again, behind this unity of battlefront, unity of fronts, was to expand the geography of the battle space, to do exactly what Danny was talking about, of instead of Israel, allowing Israel to focus on one front in Gaza, to make it have to focus its forces and its attention also on the north, also in the Golan, also in the West Bank. And the idea is to basically try to drain Israel of its capabilities, and try to seize a military initiative over Israel. So when we look at Hezbollah on the northern border, there's obviously been constant kind of escalations. Today was probably the most intense day in the last week. So there is a slight escalation, but it still is not clear, and Hezbollah still has not made a decision yet whether or not to get involved. And with that, I'll end my talk. Before we go to the question and answer period, I want to ask Sharon Frankel from Canadian Friends of Tel Aviv University to just speak briefly about some of the initiatives that Friends of TAU are promoting. And I also want to invite any of you in the audience who are activists or who have been involved in some campaigns in the last week to share very briefly some of your experiences this last week. So Sharon, please.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, good evening from wherever you're joining us today. Thank you, professors, and thank you, General, for all these insights today. Well, as we said, over the past week, the world has seen and heard about tragedies and horror beyond any humanly possible understanding. And our collective sorrow is compounded daily, including within our Tau community, which has lost children, students, and family members. 25 as of this morning. In response to the many requests and desire to help, the university has created last week the TAU Emergency Fund to provide greatly needed services for students, faculty, and staff, many of whom are now on reserve duty, but also to assist Israelis at large affected by this tragedy. Tau has harnessed all its strength and abilities to support the nationwide efforts. For example, Tel Aviv University Student Success Center established within hours that the war had been announced a 24/7 hotline with experts in social work, psychology, and psychiatry, lending their ears and advice. And our National Center for Traumatic Stress and Resilience will have mobile clinics providing psychological services in the upcoming days and weeks and probably months. Just on day one, we had over 100 people calling the hotline, and those numbers have gone up and will continue to go every day. As the beginning of the academic year has been postponed and many international students, in fact, canceled attending the entire upcoming year, the university started relocating families from the south and is now providing free temporary housing in our empty student dormitories. Our medical and dental school teams, faculty, and graduate students are in the field now, actively working with the IDF to identify the remains of victims through dental records and DNA matching, assisting in the process of returning them to their families as fast as possible. Some other initiatives which we're very proud of, and President Porat has really praised everyone on campus for volunteering. We have opened a free dental first aid clinic for soldiers and evacuees, and the dental school has held a public campaign to send thousands of dental hygiene kits to soldiers. The medical school is holding a drive to collect medical supplies and equipment for the IDF and the South. By the way, 1,200 medical students, of our 1,200 medical students, 170 have been called up for military service. As you can imagine, all these activities cost a lot of money. We need approximately $25,000 per month for each of these activities to sustain them. And the university established a worldwide goal of $5 million. And Tel Aviv University Canada is committed to raising at least 10% of the total. And we can guarantee that 100% of all donations will go directly to this emergency fund for all these critical services. If you're joining us from Canada, you can, I will post the link. You can make your donations in the link. And everybody else, I ask you to please contact your local friends associations or simply email me and I will direct you to the appropriate association in your country. Thank you for your support, and Am Yisrael Chai.
Thank you, Sharon. Is there anyone else who would like to share before we go to question and answer? Yes, Milo?
Yes.
Oh, sorry.
Did you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I'm so sorry I joined late because I didn't understand that 7:30 it's Tel Aviv time. So I'm really sorry. I miss the general and okay. But maybe I can hear the registration later on. I'm actually the former president of the community of Milan. I'm the vice president of the Union of the Jewish Communities. We are not so many members, but in this moment we are trying to give assistance to the many Israelis that are stuck in some airports, and we are giving them logistic and up to the time they will return to Israel. I just want to make a question. We are receiving a lot of requests of help. This morning we had a meeting, a Zoom meeting with our security, and okay, we are trying to understand if to concentrate this help to some association like Magen David Adom or Keren Hayesod or something. But we know that there are a lot of small reality that, let's say, like the Oz Kibbutz or others that request some help. So for us, that we are staying a little bit far, even we are connected almost 24 hours a day in order to have news. How we can have the priority? This is my question. It's not easy, but
yeah, that's a very challenging question. I don't have an answer for you, to be honest. If you want to give your contact details in the chat or to me, maybe I can put you in touch with some people.
Because even the parents of the kidnapped people are asking help to us. So I don't know what really we can do. Probably they want to sensitize the opinion, the Italian opinion about this, but I don't think we can do so much from here.
Well, we'll certainly try to help.
Milo, let me say something. I think it's quite likely that if Danny is still with us, I think he is in a far better position to offer you a way of thinking about priorities at the time of war. So I don't know if Danny is still with us, but if so, maybe Danny would like to join.
Yeah, Danny's here.
Is he still with us?
Yeah, Danny's here.
So Danny, the question was basically...
I am with you.
The question was basically from Milano, and it was there are just so many causes to donate money to. How does the community in Milano, how can it decide which one to choose?
Well, I think that they should not decide. The one who should decide is the user. In this case, it is either the IDF or mainly the IDF, I assume, or people that lost their homes and part of their families or their entire families. So if it is for the IDF, there is an organization in the States, but I think that they have also linked to Europe, and this is the Friends of the Israeli Defense Forces, to find out this organization, and this organization knows exactly what is the procedure in order to being able to get contribution for the Israeli Defense Forces. As for the civilians, those who are those that family members of themselves are in captivity in the hands of the Hamas. There is now a new coordinator, Brigadier General Gal Hirsch, and maybe he might give you the answer. I don't know exactly what is the best way to do, but remember, you have requests from many places to donate. Remember, the first priority should be for the Israeli Defense Forces and for those that were armed while living in the settlements of Gaza envelope.
Thank you.
Milo, this can be summed up. This can be summed up also differently. Follow your heart and your instincts, and you won't get it wrong.
No, I know. I mean, we always give the choice, and I mean, if you ask me, I know what to do. But I mean, I have to also to give some ideas for the people who don't know exactly the reality. In these 2 days, we collect a lot of material that somebody asked us from Israel. And the problem is that we have also some difficulties with El Al in order to send the goods. So I mean, it's not easy. I mean, I know the situation is very bad, but also the relation that we have locally is bad. So we are trying to resolve it.
Milo, and you know, just because you missed the beginning, so I just want to emphasize one point again, that I think the single most important thing any community can do is to have as many people write the members of parliament and share with them how you feel about the
we are doing, and we have a very good connection with the actual members of parliament.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
One more.
I think Ari wants to share with us.
Yeah. Ari, go ahead.
Hi, I'm a student at Tel Aviv University. I'm going to be a master's student, I guess, like a week or two. Also a fellow for the institute. I will give you one option for you to donate. Me and a few other international students within the first day or two of the war started an organization where we raise money abroad and buy supplies directly here and give them to donation sites, including with the student union here with Israeli students, and they're distributed to civilians. So that's what we're focusing on, direct civilian aid. It's called Operation Mana. I can post it in the chat. Look it up. Right now we have a Venmo. We're going to get PayPal, and I'm working on nonprofit status this week. But yeah, it's direct aid, super efficient, and that's what we're focusing on right now. So yeah.
Great. In English, we say Shalko.
So just to add to Ari, if I may, until they have set up all the status, if anybody sends it to the associations with that designation, the money will be forwarded to them 100%, no questions asked. We're all in this together, and I think this is the most important thing. we're all in this together. Doesn't matter who supports whom and what. We need to pull all our strengths together. And if we can support our amazing students and their volunteering and initiatives, we're here to do that as well. So you can donate through the associations, and we will make sure that they get the money.
Do we have anyone from the United States or from England who wants to share with us some thoughts or action? No, so anyone else from any other country? I just said the United States and England because I thought there may be someone, but anyone else? No, then let's move to Q&A, Carl.
Okay, so one of the first questions, and if you have questions, please write them in the chat, was, do you think that Hamas's leadership in Qatar should be targeted? That's to anyone. Uriya, do you want to go first, and then Danny?
Well, I don't want Danny to answer this because I think his answer carries much more authority.
Much more authority, yeah.
Yeah, so let us be the ones saying, of course.
Okay.
And yesterday.
Yeah. For Professor Shavit, as you said last week, you've spent your career studying Islam as well as Muslim communities in Europe. What do you make of the recent protests in London and other European and North American cities that not only have a pro-Palestinian but wave Hamas flags openly? Do you believe these governments need to consider revoking residency permits or citizenships?
Well, one thing to consider is that there are maybe 15, 20 million Muslims in Europe, and how many of them were actually demonstrating in pro-Hamas demonstrations. So, you know, we need perspective on this. But obviously, if you have, I don't know if you can so easily revoke citizenships, but obviously, if you have someone who acts illegally and doesn't have a permanent status in any European country, then obviously the candidacy for citizenship should be over.
A question for both of you is, what would the government of Gaza look like without Hamas? The day after, what's the day after if there's a government without Hamas in Gaza?
That's a big one, Danny.
I can try. Yes. Well, depends who will come and succeed Hamas. I think that one of the possibilities, even though it might look today still imaginary, is that after the Hamas will be expelled from Gaza, and most of his leaders and people will not live anymore, then there is a possibility to revive the negotiation with the Palestinians, either with Abu Mazen or the one which will succeed him, because he is 86 years old. And as in the Oslo Accord, we were talking about Palestinian authority, or we did not speak then about a state because it was too early. But let's assume that it will be a state. So it will be a state ruled by the Palestinian Authority, which will include the Gaza Strip, a corridor from the Gaza Strip to Judea and Samaria, and Judea and Samaria. So the one to hand over the responsibility might be the leader of the Palestinian Authority.
Carl, I see that Hakan wants to.
Yeah, Hakan, if you want to go ahead.
Yes.
Hakan, should I introduce you, or will you do it yourself?
Oh, okay, I'll introduce myself. My name is Hakan Can. I'm working at the Austrian Federal Chancellery. I'm the deputy head of the department fostering Austrian Jewish heritage and fight against anti-Semitism. It was very interesting to hear, and also the general. I also only would like to go inside to the previous question regarding demonstrations in Europe. We also do have demonstrations, pro-Palestinian demonstrations in Austria, but what we do have also is that we have the Symbols Act in Austria. It's a federal law, and in the Symbols Act, Hamas flags and also Hizballah flags and all the symbols are forbidden by law. So if there are any demonstrations, all those symbols of the terrorist organizations are banned by law. And I hope that also our friends in Europe will implement such symbols in order to fight against terrorism wherever we can. Thank you.
Thank you, Hakan. We'll have maybe one or two more questions.
Please.
So one question here to either Danny or you, Uriya. Do you think the United States putting their battleships, carrier groups off the coast will keep Lebanon and Iran from getting fully involved?
I referred to it in my presentation. I think that it might convince Iran, Hizballah, and all the others that belong to the axis of evil not to take an actual part in any kind of war between Israel and Hizballah, because I think that those ships with many cruise missiles and many aircrafts and everything, they should deteriorate, deter those elements that I just have mentioned, and convince them not to take part. If they will take part, there is a possibility that the Americans will intervene.
And one last question. How do you feel about Israel cutting off the water and electricity supply to Gaza? And do you think this will negatively affect international support for Israel?
You know what, I'll take this one, and also maybe with your permission, wrap up the discussion.
Yep.
Well, I'm not happy about it. You know, as much as there is now this sense of vengeance, and a justified, natural sense of vengeance, it doesn't make me happy to think that a 5-year-old child is going to die, and it doesn't matter who's that 5-year-old child. But the reality imposed on us, and in this case, it's not a matter of being self-righteous to say, oh, imposed on us. The reality that was imposed on us is that there would simply not be a way to defend the children of Israel, Jews and Arabs, by the way, alike, without causing the Gaza population a lot of pain that could have been avoided if the leadership, which they elected, had not used them as human shields. That's the truth. It's a complicated truth. I know people don't like complicated truth, but it is a truth. Now, just a final word, which I think also perhaps addresses a few of the questions that we did not have an opportunity to address. We opened by saying that Hamas are Nazis, that they earned that title that we do not easily use. And what happened revives for many Israelis, not just all of Israelis, it revives the trauma of the Holocaust. There is one crucial difference, nevertheless, which is that 80 years ago, there was no IDF. There were no people like Yatom and those he trained, who had the ability to defend the Jewish people. So we have to bear that in mind. What happened was not a Holocaust. It was a shock. It was an assault. These were war crimes. But there is a state of the Jewish people at the moment with a mighty military force. That is the reality. We have to keep that in mind. The final point, because there were a few questions about Qatar and Lebanon and Iran. I think there is an uneasy strategic lesson to learn, not just from what happened on Saturday, but events over the past 20 years in this region and beyond it. There's a huge difference between terror organizations with a state and terror organizations without a state. Their ability to train, mobilize, finance, gather intelligence there is so crucially different when they have a state. This was true for Al-Qaeda and the Taliban in Afghanistan before 9/11, and it is true for Hamas today, which brings me back to the most vital point. This war has to end with the state of Hamas, the terror state led by Hamas, non-existent. No matter how long it takes, no matter how many victims on the other side it results in, that has to be the objective of the war. That someone else who is not Hamas and respects international law, respects the internationally recognized borders of Israel, respects the idea of a state of the Jewish people in the Middle East, someone else will rule that territory. And if there isn't anyone else, then it will have to be Israel. So I think it's a good opportunity to thank everyone, and especially you, Carl. I know it wasn't an easy day to bring this together. I also thank very, very much General Yatom, former head of the Mossad and many other things, for giving us his time. I think most of you are not from Israel, don't know just how busy it is these days. So this is greatly, greatly appreciated. As always, thank you all for joining us from so many different countries around the world. And I guess we'll meet soon again.
Thank you.
Good night.